Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the voice of reason. Today, we are continuing our ongoing coverage of the war between the Russian Federation and Ukraine. Now, before I start, I wanted to address the content provider, Denny Davidov. I know there are quite a few Americans that watch his content. He's obviously an English speaker. His primary language is Russian, not Ukrainian. He comes from Ukraine. Some people believe he is in Ukraine. He is not in the Ukraine. He was smuggled out of Ukraine into Romania and then into Switzerland. Some people have informed me that Davidov was actually dressed as a woman when he was smuggled from Ukraine into Romania. Again, he is a fighting age male. He received his notice of conscription into the Ukrainian military and chose to flee the country as opposed to serving in the Ukrainian military. Now, while his brothers in arms die en masse fighting against the Russians, he sits in the safety of Switzerland, making somewhat dubious content. So again, if you watch his content, understand he is not in the Ukraine. He was smuggled out of the Ukraine to avoid military service. So, here we go. We're continuing to watch what is happening very, very closely in the ongoing fighting around Avdiivka. The Russians have made a breakthrough in the eastern sector of the conflict, and we'll go in and we'll kind of zoom in this area, and we will look exactly what has happened over the last, and we're going to go back all the way to November, the beginning of November, where you, the viewer, can kind of see what has happened. So keep an eye on this area here. This was one of the primary areas of Ukrainian fortifications. They were using these buildings, the industrial area, the forests, the basements of some of these single-family dwellings here to the south of this main road going into Avdiivka. Now, if you watch what has happened, we have seen quite a bit an uptick of Russian assaults over it. So you can see this has turned into a gray zone now as the Russians have moved in. Fighting starts November 14th. Russians continue to push up, continue to expand the area where the fighting is occurring. Remember, the gray zone is the area of engagements. And then finally, the Russians break through in this area. So fighting continues. The Russians are continuing ongoing assaults. We're seeing the same thing in the northwestern quadrant as well. As you can see here, the Russians have made quite a bit of expansion over the last several days. Here we can watch all this area expand as the Russians continue to tighten the noose near Avdiivka. Now, as we watch this happening, as we continue to see these successful, methodical Russian operations, we're really getting a response from the Ukrainian military. And that response is the Russians are taking horrendous casualties. Now, we don't know that. Now, the Ukrainians do produce and show evidence of the destruction of Russian armored vehicles. They have shown attacks elsewhere, obviously. But again, we don't know the actual casualty rates. No one is getting that information. The Ukrainians are really getting into the realm of reporting numbers that are just completely unreasonable. In one case, they've reported that more than 7,000 Russians have been killed in the last week. Now, that number is indeed very dubious, and given how the Russians are fighting in this area now, it doesn't lead one to believe that is the actual casualty rate. Again, very methodical operation. We're not seeing massed Russian attacks in terms of tanks and armored fighting vehicles like we saw earlier in the initial assault on Avdiivka. Yes, in the initial assaults on Avdiivka, we observed company-sized elements of Russian armored vehicles being eliminated by Ukrainian forces. Now, we have no way to tell or no way to verify with what the Ukrainians are saying in terms of the massive amounts of casualties that are being alleged by the Ukrainians are in fact true. And at this point, we just simply have to take it with a grain of salt. The Ukrainians continue to report of success on the eastern bank of the Dnipro River. So again, as I've reported before, we are not seeing large amounts of Ukrainian maneuver units making its way across to the eastern bank of the Dnipro River. What we're seeing, okay, are small inflatable boats with anywhere from 4 to 10 Ukrainian soldiers being transported across the Dnipro River, and they land in these small units and they conduct light infantry operation. They also use these light infantry as observation units to attack Russian forces with long-range artillery such as HIMARS and other systems. Is it effective? To an extent. It's more of a PR, a public relations effectiveness campaign designed to take the acknowledgement that the Zaporizhzhia offensive failed. So by claiming that large numbers of Ukrainian forces have commenced a quote-unquote bridgehead, and when one thinks of a bridgehead, they believe that possibly pontoon bridges are being established, and the Ukrainians are starting to bring across large numbers of tanks and armored fighting vehicles for a possible assault into the Kherson region. That is not what is happening. Again, small boats with small amounts of Ukrainian forces conducting operations against Russian forces. The Russians, on the other hand, again, as I've reported before, do not have their main defensive line set up right against the Dnipro River. It is further back. It's further back near Oleshki and other areas. They still have terrain features that give them the ability to fend off Ukrainian forces, and that is basically the higher, drier ground, which separates these vast marshes and rivers that Ukrainian light infantry operate in. So right now, we believe the Russians see this Ukrainian operation on the eastern bank in this area that is gray, in this area here that is green, allegedly controlled by Ukrainian forces, again, as simply a PR campaign to say, hey, look, we have forces on this side of the river, we're active. And again, the dumbed-down mainstream media then goes and runs off with it and says, hey, look, the Ukrainians have established a bridgehead in Kherson, and they're continuing offensive operations against the Russians. Again, light infantry units moving in with small inflatable rafts, not able to launch major offensive operations against the key town of Oleshki and other towns in the Kherson region. So that's kind of where we set for that right now, and we'll continue to watch. In all likelihood, the press, the MSM, will, in the Ukrainian military, the Ukrainian state, will at some point just quit talking about Kherson. And that will be a sign that they've decided to move their forces back to the western bank of the Dnipro River into Kherson City. Again, we don't believe we're seeing what is going to be an effective operation by the Ukrainians to seize control of Oleshki. They just don't have that capability right now. Again, the Russians see it more or less as a nuisance campaign of light infantry forces operating in this area. But we're going to continue to monitor very closely and and see what happens. We anticipate that the Ukrainians, especially as we go into the dead of winter, will tire of being pounded day in and day out by Russian artillery in this area, and they will withdraw back into Kherson. But we're going to continue to watch very, very closely what continues around Avdiivka. We're continuing to watch very closely what is going on near Bakhmut. Fighting continues in this area as well. Again, no sign that the Ukrainians are going to launch a new offensive to take control of Bakhmut. The Russians have fairly strong defensive lines in this area. They did a update with the defensive lines, where you can kind of see and differentiate between Dragon's Teeth and moats and trends. I'm not sure how they do that, but we'll have to take a look at that at a later date. But again, the Russians have established significant defensive lines in and around Bakhmut. And we don't believe the Ukrainians at this point have the capability of launching an operation to retake Bakhmut at this point. A lot of Ukrainian capability in terms of equipment, manpower, fighting units were degraded greatly in the failed Zaporizhia offensive. This area here, south of Orkiv, and other parts of the Zaporizhia front. Again, if we look at the early stages back in June, where the Ukrainians had not really declared that they had launched the offensive, but most Ukrainian supporters were claiming that within a matter of weeks, the Ukrainians would break through Russian lines and would sever the land corridor between Russia proper and Russia proper in the Crimean Peninsula. And that obviously never happened. The Ukrainians at this point, in terms of the Zaporizhia offensive, did not even take Plan C objectives. And Plan C objectives were Tokmak and other areas. The Ukrainians believed. The Ukrainian leadership believed in Kiev, and some personnel here in the United States and Europe, in terms of politicians, believed that at worst case scenario, the Ukrainians would have pressed all the way down and had and broken through the main various Russian defensive lines and taken control of Tokmak. Didn't happen, not even close to happening, much less the original battlefield objectives of going all the way down to Melitopol, and again the final objective of seizing Berdyansk, and then doing a pivot towards Mariupol and the Crimea. Again, that was the initial objectives by the Ukrainian military, and none of that, unfortunately for the Ukrainians, succeeded. And again, just marginal pushes took place in terms of success, and we have to wonder if, in fact, the operation that took place south of Orkiv, where we observed this salient form, was actually purpose-driven and designed by the Russian military to encapsulate these Ukrainian forces, and we will eventually see Russian counterattacks to push back this salient and eliminate Ukrainian forces in this cauldron or salient. So we're going to watch that very, very closely as well in the coming days and weeks. We do anticipate an uptick, a continued uptick in Russian operations over the winter, and we believe that will indeed continue. We don't expect the Ukrainians to look at new offensive operations till probably in the summer, best case scenario. Best case scenario, depending on the political situation here in the United States, and if the U.S. continues to support the Ukrainian military in terms of injecting weapons and armament for the Ukrainians. So we'll continue to watch. We'll continue to report. Thank you for joining us today. More to come very, very soon. And as always, have a good day.